On my son's birthday, all I wanted was a family dinner. Nothing else, just love, hot food, and peace. But as soon as we entered the restaurant, my daughter-in-law looked at me with that venomous smile and said, in front of everyone, "You don't have the money to be here." At that moment, my heart sank, not because of the insult, but because of my son's silence. I didn't know it yet, but that night would reveal betrayals I never imagined. I was going to expose the truth she had hidden for years, and nobody, absolutely nobody in that restaurant, was prepared for what was about to happen. Because sometimes life doesn't humiliate the wrong person, she humiliates exactly those who deserve it. I still remember the sound of her voice more than the exact words. We were standing by the host stand, waiting for our table, the smell of garlic and grilled steak in the air, when she leaned toward my son and said, "Your mom can't afford this place. You should pay before it gets embarrassing." She didn't whisper. She wanted me to hear. Her tone was light, joking, but her eyes were full of poison. In that moment, it felt like the whole restaurant went quiet around us. I pretended I hadn't heard. Old women learn that trick. We stay quiet so no one perceived that we caught every word. My fingers tightened around my purse, the one I'd bought on sale, and loved like it was designer. I felt my cheeks getting warm, not from shame, but from anger. But I swallowed it. I've survived worse than a silly girl with a sharp tongue. My son looked at me, then at her, trapped between guilt and fear, and lowered his eyes to the floor. "You have to understand something. I wasn't born into money. I grew up counting coins for bread and rice, stretching soup, so it could feed one more hungry mouth. When my son was little, I worked 2 jobs, so he'd never have to know what it meant to go to bed with an empty stomach. I didn't always win that battle, but I tried. And now, to hear the woman he married say I couldn't afford a dinner in front of him, it opened an old wound I thought had already healed. She never liked simple things. From the first day I met her, she complained about everything, my curtains, my dishes, even the way I wrapped gifts. "It's cute," she'd say, with that little smile that wasn't a smile at all. She'd make jokes about my clothes, my car, the neighborhood I lived in, always dressed up as humor, always with that tone that says, "I'm above you." That night at the restaurant, she wasn't joking anymore. She'd finally said out loud what she'd been thinking for a long time. My son tried to change the subject. "Mom, are you sure about this place?" he asked, his voice soft, almost apologetic. I smiled at him, even though my heart was heavy. "Of course," I said. "My son only turns this age once. We'll make it special." I watched my daughter-in-law roll her eyes, like I'd just said something ridiculous. She checked her phone, probably complaining about me to someone else, and I felt that familiar sting in my chest, part disappointment, part disbelief that this was the woman my boy had chosen. It's funny, when you're young, you think the people who hurt you most will be strangers. As you get older, you realize it's usually the one sitting at your table. I never imagined that the person trying to humiliate me in public would be the mother of my granddaughter. I'd imagined we'd be allies, 2 women loving the same family, working side by side to make birthdays and holidays beautiful. Instead, I'd become her favorite target, the poor old mother-in-law she could step on to feel taller. The hostess finally called our name, and we followed her through the restaurant. I could feel eyes on us, or at least I imagined them. My daughter-in-law walked ahead like she owned the place, heels clicking on the floor, hair perfectly done, that expensive perfume filling the air behind her. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of every year on my shoulders. I wasn't embarrassed about money. I was embarrassed for my son, for the kind of woman he'd given his heart to. As we sat down, she kept making those little comments. "Do you know how much the steaks are here?" she asked my son, loud enough. "I mean, I don't think your mom really checked the prices." Then she looked at me with a sweet little smile and added, "No offense, of course." Ah, that phrase. No offense. People only say it when they know exactly what they're doing. I took a sip of water to steady myself, hearing my late husband's voice in my mind telling me to breathe. Inside, though, my thoughts were racing. She thought I hadn't planned this. She thought I had just picked a restaurant blindly, hoping my son would step in and rescue me at the last second. She didn't know I'd been saving for this dinner for months. She didn't know I had spoken with the manager personally. She didn't know I had arranged something special. It's always dangerous when someone assumes you're weak just because you don't show your cards. I watched her talk, laugh, pull faces when she thought I wasn't looking. She joked with my son about old-fashioned people and how some generations just don't get how expensive life is now. As if I hadn't fought through a world 10 times harder than the one she knew. In her mind, I was just an obstacle, a reminder of a life she wanted to erase from my son's memory. Little did she know, I was the reason he even had the life she enjoyed now. That comment in the lobby about me not being able to afford the place, that was the moment her mask finally slipped for good. It wasn't just a rude remark. It was a confession. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as a burden, a source of embarrassment. And while I sat there, folding my napkin slowly on my lap, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not argue. I would not shout. I would not create a scene. No. I would let the night unfold, and I would let the truth speak for me. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that by the end of that dinner, it wouldn't be my bank account under the spotlight. It would be her character. The moment we sat down, I felt the tension settle over the table like a heavy fog. It wasn't just between me and her anymore. Even the waiter felt it. He approached with menus and a polite smile, but his eyes flicked nervously between our faces. My daughter-in-law grabbed her menu like it was a weapon and sighed loudly, as if just being there was a chore. I tried to breathe deeply, reminding myself that this was supposed to be my son's special night. But the air, it was thick with something bitter. My son kept glancing at her, then at me, trying to gauge the temperature of the two women in his life. He looked exhausted, like a man walking on thin ice hoping it doesn't crack under his feet. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. I wanted to reach across the table and hold his hand like I used to when he was a child. But I didn't. I didn't want to embarrass him further. Not with her watching every move I made, ready to turn anything into a joke at my expense. She made sure her little comments didn't stop. "Oh, look at these prices," she said, widening her eyes dramatically. "Some people really don't understand how expensive everything is nowadays." Some people. She didn't need to say who. My son shifted uncomfortably, pretending to study the wine list. I could tell he knew what she was doing, but he was too tired to fight. He'd been fighting for months, silently, in ways only mothers can sense. As for me, I focused on the sounds around us. The clinking of silverware. The low hum of conversations. The sizzling of steaks being carried across the room. I tried to let those sounds calm me down, tried to let them remind me why I was there. Love. Love for my son. Love for the boy I raised. Love for the man he'd become, despite everything. But then her voice would cut through the ambience like a knife, dragging me back to the reality of her presence. "I mean, at least the place is cute," she continued, leaning back in her chair. "Not my style, obviously, but cute." She looked directly at me as she said it, her lips curled into that mocking smirk. I wondered how someone could be so young and already so cold. How someone could look at another person and choose cruelty over kindness. She didn't know my past. She didn't know what this dinner meant to me. But she didn't care. That was the part that hurt. And still, I stayed quiet. That was my strategy. Silence. People underestimate silence. They think it means weakness. They think it means surrender. But silence can be a weapon too. Silence gives the other person room to dig their own grave without realizing it. I watched her dig with every insult, every exaggerated sigh, every roll of her eyes. I could have called her out. I could have embarrassed her in front of everyone. But no. I wanted her to feel safe enough to keep going. The waiter came back with bread, the warm smell filling the air, and asked if we wanted wine. Before my son could answer, she cut in. "Nothing too expensive, please. We don't want any surprises at the end." She looked at me again, this time with fake concern. "Right, Mom?" "Mom." She said it like it tasted sour in her mouth. I simply smiled back, even though my heart was tightening in my chest. I had to remind myself, breathe. Just breathe. Inside, though, my memories were swirling. I remembered the birthdays when it was just me and my son, eating cake at a tiny kitchen table, laughing about how the frosting always melted in the heat. I remembered sewing his clothes by hand, because buying new ones was too expensive. I remembered the nights I let him eat the last piece of bread while I drank water to fill my stomach. And now, after everything I sacrificed, I was sitting across from a woman who thought she was better than me because she wore expensive perfume. I kept my eyes on my son. He was the only reason I didn't get up and leave right then. He deserved a peaceful night, a warm conversation, a smile from his mother. But I couldn't pretend everything was perfect. I could feel the hurt gathering inside me like a storm, and I knew it would break eventually. Not tonight, but soon, very soon. Because no matter how quietly I sat, she was determined to push me. When the waiter asked if we were ready to order, she leaned over again and whispered to my son, "Just make sure she doesn't accidentally order something she can't pay for." She laughed. I didn't. My son's face turned red, and his hands curled into fists under the table. He didn't offend me, not yet, but that was the first moment I saw a crack in him. The first moment he realized the woman he married wasn't who he thought she was. The tension didn't ruin the dinner. No. It transformed it. It stretched the night into something larger, something heavier. Something that felt like the beginning of the end. Every word she spoke was a thread pulling the truth closer to the surface. And as I watched her, laughing, mocking, enjoying the attention she thought she had, I knew she had no idea what was coming. Because that dinner wasn't just a celebration. It was a test. And she was failing it spectacularly. There was a moment, right after the waiter walked away, when I caught my son looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy. A mixture of guilt and helplessness. It reminded me of the time he broke a neighbor's window and came home trembling, not because he feared punishment, but because he knew he had disappointed me. That same expression was on his face now. Except this time, he hadn't broken anything. Something was breaking him. He kept adjusting his napkin, folding and unfolding it, his fingers fidgeting like he didn't know what to do with his own hands. I could see him swallowing hard, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the table as if he wished he could disappear into it. A mother recognizes these small signs. The tremor in the fingertips, the way he avoided eye contact, the nervous tapping of his foot. My son was drowning in shame, and not because of me. Every word his wife said seemed to push him deeper into that shame. She mocked me openly, disguised as jokes, and then turned to him expecting him to laugh along. Sometimes he forced a smile, but even his smile trembled. Other times he didn't answer at all, and she would elbow him lightly, whispering, "Come on, don't be boring." The poor boy was trapped between loyalty to his mother and the fear of upsetting his wife. I knew this dance too well. I'd seen it before in other houses, in other families, and it always ended badly. At one point, she asked him, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "So, honey, do you think your mom even knows what a tip is in a place like this?" She laughed, expecting him to join in. He didn't. He looked at her with this tired, broken softness, as if he had run out of excuses to protect her from herself. Then he looked at me, slowly, apologetically, like he wanted to say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how to stop her." I wished he knew he didn't need to apologize. It wasn't his job to control her behavior. It wasn't his fault that she had a heart colder than winter. But mothers carry their children's guilt like it's our own. I felt ashamed because he felt ashamed. I felt hurt because he felt small. If I could have taken that weight from him and thrown it far away, I would have. But all I could do was watch him crumble, silently, under a pressure he never deserved. As the dishes were served, I noticed he barely touched his food. He pushed it around with his fork, splitting a piece of steak into tiny fragments as if that would keep him distracted, keep him from thinking too much. His appetite was gone. Not because of the food, but because shame tastes bitter enough to ruin any meal. Meanwhile, she devoured her plate happily, oblivious to the storm she was creating. Or maybe not oblivious. Maybe she enjoyed it. He tried, at one point, to gently redirect the conversation. "Mom used to make a stew like this," he said with a soft smile, hoping to bring some warmth to the table. Before I could respond, she interrupted with a loud snort. "Oh, please, honey, no offense, but your mom's dishes are simple. You grew up eating basic food. This is real cuisine." My heart dropped. And his did too. I saw it in the way he lowered his eyes, in the way his shoulders sank a little more. There's nothing more painful for a mother than seeing her child humiliated by the person who should protect him. I could almost see his memories fighting inside him. Memories of our tiny kitchen, our cheap meals, our laughter. Memories she wanted to erase, as if they were something he should feel ashamed of.
He wasn't ashamed of me.
He was ashamed of her. Ashamed of the way she treated me, the way she treated him while thinking no one else noticed. At one point, he leaned toward me and whispered, "Mom, please, don't take what she says to heart. She doesn't mean it." I looked at him, this grown man who used to fit in my arms, and gently touched his hand. "I know, Euphelio. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. And he knew I wasn't. His eyes glistened for a second, but he blinked quickly, swallowing whatever emotion tried to escape. I realized, watching him there, that his silence wasn't compliance. It was exhaustion. He had been trying, day after day, to keep peace in a home where love had been replaced by tension. He wanted tonight to be perfect, not for himself, but for me. Yet she ruined it again and again, carving deeper wounds into a heart that had already been bruised too many times. And even though he never said it out loud, I could feel the truth in the air. My son wasn't just ashamed of her behavior. He was ashamed for allowing it to go on this long. And that would only be the beginning of the truth that would come to light that night. I've always believed that there are people who see more than they say. People who observe the world in silence, paying attention to small gestures, the forced smile, the lost gaze, the sigh that no one else hears. The waitress that night was exactly that kind of person. From the moment she brought the first waters to the table, I could feel it. She was seeing everything. Every detail. Every humiliation. Every time my daughter-in-law turned her nose up at me. She was young, perhaps just over 20, but she had an attentive, almost maternal gaze that contrasted with her age. When my daughter-in-law made that first comment about me, not knowing how to read restaurant prices, the waitress glanced at me quickly, as if silently asking me, "Are you all right, ma'am?" I smiled, like women of my generation do, pursing my lips together, holding back the pain, hiding everything. But she noticed. I saw in her eyes that she noticed. Every time my daughter-in-law cracked one of those jokes, the waitress would look away, embarrassed for me. While taking our orders, she maintained a professional demeanor, but her eyes said something else. They said indignation. They said empathy. They said she knew exactly the kind of person my daughter-in-law was. And that gave me a small sense of comfort, as if the universe were reminding me that I wasn't crazy. That someone else had seen it. When my daughter-in-law complained about the wine glass, not because it was bad, but because she wanted to seem picky, the waitress took a deep breath, holding back her patience. "I can bring you another one, ma'am," she replied gently. "But this is the same glass we use for all the customers." My daughter-in-law looked her up and down, as if analyzing an object. "Then perhaps you could choose a better one this time." I felt ashamed for her lack of humility, for her lack of respect. And the waitress? She simply smiled. A smile so polite and composed that only someone who has worked serving others would recognize it. A smile that said, "I will not lower myself till I saw strength in that girl," and I admired it. She turned her back, walked to the counter, and stood there for a few seconds, taking a deep breath, composing herself. That gesture, so small and so human, touched my heart. How many times have I done that in my own home? How many times have I taken a deep breath to keep from crying? While we ate, the waitress came back a few times to ask if everything was all right. Every time she approached, my son smiled gently at her, in a pure gesture of politeness. My daughter-in-law, on the other hand, narrowed her eyes, as if offended by the mere existence of that young woman. On one of the visits, the waitress left the bread closer to me, not to herself. It was subtle, but it was intentional. It was as if she were saying, "I see you, ma'am.
I respect you, ma'am."
There was a moment when she accidentally dropped a napkin on the floor. As she bent down to pick it up, she clearly heard my daughter-in-law whisper to my son, "These people who work in service should be better trained. It seems like nobody knows how to do anything right." The waitress froze for a split second, still crouching. When she stood up, her face was calm, but her eyes burned with a mixture of pain and indignation. She looked at me again, quickly, and in that look I almost heard, "You don't deserve this." From then on, she began to treat me with an almost protective gentleness. When she served me water, she waited until I drank before walking away. When she brought the plates, she placed mine with more care. When she asked if everything was all right, she always looked directly into my eyes, as if seeking my true answer, not a polite one. And, honestly, after so much disdain from my own daughter-in-law, that human gesture meant more than she could have imagined. I also noticed that she watched my son with a mixture of pity and understanding. He tried to keep the peace, tried to smile, tried to act as if nothing was happening. But there is no better actor than a woman who fights to maintain her dignity. And there is no worse actor than a man trying to hide that his marriage is destroying him.
She saw it.
I saw in her eyes that she saw it. At the end of the evening, when she brought dessert, the cake I had specially ordered, she looked at me with such sincere affection that it almost made me cry. "This looks beautiful," she said, setting the plate down in front of me. But I knew she wasn't talking about the cake. It was a veiled comment, a silent gesture saying, "The lady did it with love." I know. And I respect that. My daughter-in-law completely ignored it. My son understood. I felt it. And although I didn't know it at the time, that waitress would be the missing piece, the silent witness who would later reveal something that would change the course of that night. Before the main dishes even reached our table, my daughter-in-law had already served the first humiliation of the evening, and she did it with the same ease as breathing. She loved these little cruelties. For her, it was almost a sport, finding the weak spot, poking slowly, and watching the person writhe without being able to react. And that night, apparently, I was her favorite target. Deep down, I knew. She wanted to break me before dinner even arrived. The first humiliation came when the waiter brought the appetizers. He placed a salad in front of me, simple, beautiful, delicate. Before I could thank her, she laughed, not a loud laugh, no, but that venomous, almost childish little laugh she let out just to hurt. "Mom, are you sure you can eat that?" she asked, tilting her head as if speaking to a child. You know, stomachs of older people can be a little sensitive. I felt the blow.
Direct, dry, silent.
My son's eyes widened, clearly uncomfortable. "Enough," he murmured, but she ignored him. She ignored anything that didn't feed her own ego. "I'm just saying," she continued, shrugging. "We wouldn't want any surprises at the table, especially since you insisted on choosing this place." The emphasis on "you" hit me like an arrow, and for a moment I felt my fingers tremble. I took a deep breath, composing myself as I had done my whole life. The second humiliation was more calculated. She asked the waiter to explain each dish on the menu in detail, but it wasn't curiosity. It was a spectacle. With each dish he described, she looked at me as if she expected me to be impressed or bewildered. "Mom, do you even know what risotto is made of?" she asked aloud, forcing a false innocence. The waiter looked away, embarrassed. My face flushed, but my voice remained firm. "Of course I know, darling. I've been cooking risotto since before you were born." For a second, her smile faltered. Just a second. But it was enough for me to see the crack. She hadn't expected me to respond. She hadn't expected me to have a voice. She expected submission. She expected silence. And when she didn't get it, she orchestrated the third humiliation of the night, the cruelest yet. She raised her wine glass and, looking around, said in a playful tone, "Let's toast to my husband, who had to grow up eating, well, very humble meals." That hit my son like a punch. I saw it. His face flushed, not from shame for me. It never was that, but from shame for her. He slowly put down the glass, as if any sudden movement could make things worse. "Stop it," he said. A whisper, but firm. She raised her eyebrows, surprised that he dared to answer. But still, she continued.
What?
I'm just being honest. You don't have to get offended. It's the truth. The fourth humiliation came even sharper. While my son took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure, she leaned toward him and said something she clearly wanted me to hear. Look, honey, I'm just saying your mom trying to pay for this dinner is sweet, but unrealistic. We both know who really pays the bills in this family. I will never forget that moment. Never. It was like watching someone spit on the ground where you've spent your whole life building something. It's curious how, sometimes, the greatest violence isn't in the shouting, but in the calm, in the precision, in the intention. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to curse. She knew exactly how to use small words to create big wounds. And no matter how hard I tried, no matter how deeply I breathed, those words fell on my skin like boiling water. They burned me. They cut me. They reminded me of all the struggle she would never understand. When the fifth humiliation arrived, I already felt the weight building in my chest. She pulled out her cell phone, opened the front camera, and purposefully turned it to me. Smile, Mom, she said, laughing. I'm taking a picture to send to my friends. They'll never believe where we are. The waitress, that girl who saw everything, watched indignantly, her lips pressed together. I smiled.
But my smile was a mask.
Armor. A silent way of saying, you won't bring me down. And then, before dinner arrived, before the main course touched the table, I realized it wasn't about food. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about any restaurant. It was about power, about control, about her wanting to diminish me to feel big. And there, in that instant, even hurt, even tired, I made a silent choice. The same one I made when I raised my son. The same one I made in so many difficult moments of my life. I wouldn't retaliate now, not at that table, not at that restaurant. Because her true humiliation, the one she would never forget, it was still being prepared. Sitting at that table felt like sitting on a stage, with dozens of invisible eyes fixed on me. They weren't just strangers observing. They were silent judgments floating in the air, each one carried by the way my daughter-in-law spoke to me. I knew most people there weren't paying attention, but some were. There's always someone watching. There's always someone who notices when something is wrong. And that night, I felt each gaze as if it were a thin blade touching my skin. On our side was an older couple, seated so close that they inevitably overheard some of my daughter-in-law's comments. The woman looked at me twice, the first time with bewilderment, the second with pity. It was the kind of look that says, poor thing, it must be difficult. And although I hadn't asked for it, nor desired it, it hit me like a mirror. Because it was difficult. More difficult than anyone there could imagine. Too difficult for a birthday dinner. On the other side, a group of young friends were celebrating something, perhaps a graduation. They were laughing loudly, toasting, taking pictures. On one of the occasions when my daughter-in-law corrected me for the third time on how to use the napkin, imagine me using the wrong napkin. One of the girls in the group looked at me in surprise and then glared at my daughter-in-law disapprovingly. As if to say, what's the point of all this? I felt that silent support as an unexpected caress. And then there was my son's silence. That silence spoke louder than 1,000 words. He looked at the plates, at the tablecloth, at his own hand. Anything but the face of the woman beside him. And that silence was also seen by others. The elderly couple noticed. The group of young people noticed. Even the waiter noticed. His shame was no longer invisible. The lack of sparkle in his eyes betrayed something profound. A man who had lost control of his own home, of his own peace. My daughter-in-law, however, seemed to live in another reality. She talked, commented, laughed, completely oblivious to the stares. Or perhaps not. Maybe she noticed and simply didn't care. Some people are like that. They are capable of setting an entire room on fire and still complaining about the heat. She liked the stage she built at my expense. She liked feeling that she had an audience, even if it was a silent, uncomfortable audience, judging her. When the waiter brought the side dishes, she complained, saying that her dish was too simple for an expensive place. The waiter politely tried to explain. She interrupted. "I'm paying for quality," she said, in an arrogant tone. That's when I heard someone from the next group whisper, "What an attitude." It wasn't about me. It was about her. For the first time that night, I realized that her mask was slipping in front of others, not just me. I glanced around discreetly and saw that some faces were no longer just curious, they were uneasy. A younger woman, sitting 2 tables behind, crossed her arms and stared at my daughter-in-law with a hard look, as if she understood the kind of person she was. A gentleman raised his eyebrows when she made another comment about people who have no sense of price. It was as if the whole room began to breathe differently, more heavily, more aware of what was happening. Even so, I remained calm. The anger came in waves, but I held it back. I breathed deeply. I drank water slowly. I adjusted the napkin on my lap. Not out of submission, but by choice. Because I knew that any reaction of mine would only fuel it. And, however much it hurt, I had to endure it. Endure it until the right moment. Endure it until the truth was revealed, not by me, but by the circumstances she herself created. And the more she spoke, the clearer it became that she wasn't just belittling me, she was destroying herself in front of everyone. Every exaggerated laugh, every malicious comment, every public display of superiority was another brick in the wall she was building between herself and the people around her. Even the waitress, who was trying to maintain her composure, could no longer hide her discomfort. It was as if we were all witnessing something inevitable, the downfall of someone who climbs too high above others. But the most ironic thing, the thing is, my daughter-in-law didn't notice any of that, nothing. For her, the night was still under control. Little did she know that control was about to slip from her hands, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. There are words that hurt like a sharp knife, not because of their strength, but because of their precision. And that night, my daughter-in-law found exactly the word she wanted to use to hurt me. Broke. She waited for the right moment, waited for the restaurant to be busy, waited for the waitress to approach. And then, in a light, casual voice, she uttered the phrase that would echo in the air like a slap. "My mother-in-law is broke. She can't afford places like this." The waitress froze for a second, clutching the tray. My son looked up, indignant, as if he'd been hit in the chest. And I felt the world go silent. A silence known only to those who have endured public humiliation. That silence where even the sounds of conversations around you seem too distant. Where you only hear your own heart beating, fast, painful, hurt. My daughter-in-law said that with a smile. A sweet, forced, fake smile. The kind of smile that doesn't light up the face, it only darkens the intention. "It's okay," she continued, as if defending me. "I mean, we all know she tries, but life wasn't very generous with her." She tilted her head, making a pitying expression. "Pity. Pity for me. The worst humiliation isn't when someone insults you, it's when someone pretends to protect you while trampling on your pride." I felt my face flush, not with shame, but with indignation. I wasn't ashamed of my story. I never had been. I worked hard. I fought. I survived. I built everything on my own. She was the one who should feel ashamed for her lack of character. But there, in that moment, I was surrounded by strangers, and her narrative had been thrown into the air as an indisputable truth. The broke mother-in-law. The poor old lady trying to impress. That was the image she wanted to paint. My son reacted first. "Stop it," he said, firmly this time. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. But she just laughed, touching his arm. "Honey, relax. I'm just being honest." Honest? Oh, if she only knew what the word honesty really meant. The group of young people at the next table fell silent. The older couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. The waitress took a deep breath, as if holding her tongue to avoid saying something. I thought about answering. I thought about telling her everything right there, about the savings I had put aside, about how I had planned that dinner down to the smallest detail, even about the surprise that would come later. I thought about reminding her that poverty is not a lack of money, but a lack of soul. However, I said nothing, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because I realized something important. The people around her had already seen who she was, and I didn't need to show them. She continued with her little act, as if she were the star of an imaginary show. I mean, it's fine, she repeated. We'll cover whatever she can't pay. That we carried poison. It was as if to say I was there as a favor, that I needed them, that I was a burden. And with each word she uttered, my son sank a little further into his chair, ashamed not of me, but of having allowed his wife to go so far. The waitress mustered her courage and, for the first time that night, said something more than necessary. Ma'am, she said, looking at me and not my daughter-in-law, your order is already taken care of. My daughter-in-law laughed.
See?
People pity her. That's sweet. The waitress locked eyes with her, and in that instant I saw. She wanted to tell the truth. She wanted to expose everything. But she couldn't.
Not yet.
I just nodded discreetly to the waitress, thanking her silently. She understood. And while my daughter-in-law continued laughing, opening and closing the menu as if she were a queen choosing a banquet, I realized something profound. Sometimes, when someone tries to humiliate you, all you need to do is let them talk. Because the more she talked, the more she revealed. And everyone, absolutely everyone, was watching. She thought she was belittling me. She didn't realize she was only belittling herself. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture, and looked at my son. His gaze met mine, sad, regretful, silently pleading for forgiveness. And, in that instant, a thought passed through my mind like a whisper. Let her speak. Because her bill, not the restaurant's, is still to arrive. There comes a moment in every woman's life, especially in the lives of women my age, when you realize that talking doesn't change anything, that shouting doesn't convince anyone, that confronting someone so full of venom only makes you stoop to their level. And that night, in that restaurant lit by lukewarm lights, while the world seemed to silently watch that humiliation, I felt something inside me suddenly calm down. It was then that I decided to remain silent. It wasn't a silence of defeat. It wasn't resignation. It wasn't fear. It was something different, something that came from the depths of the soul. A kind of silence that only those who have survived many battles learn to use. I looked at my daughter-in-law talking, moving her hands exaggeratedly, laughing loudly at her own jokes, trying to get everyone's attention, and, for the first time that night, I understood. She wanted me to react. She wanted a spectacle. A scene. Something out of control. Something she could use later to make me look like the villain. And so, I simply decided not to give it to her. Instead, I took a deep breath, adjusted my blouse, and put on that understated smile. The kind of smile only women who have cried silently can manage. That smile taught more than 1,000 words. It said, I see everything. I understand everything. And I won't stoop to your level. My daughter-in-law didn't understand that silence. People like her don't know how to handle the absence of conflict. They only know how to fight when someone fights back. My son noticed immediately. He saw when my shoulders relaxed. He saw when I stopped clutching the napkin. He saw when I looked at the plate calmly. And for the first time that night, he smiled, not a smile of joy, but a smile of relief. As if to say, thank you, Mom. Thank you for not making things worse. But what he didn't know was that my silence wasn't preventing anything. On the contrary, he was preparing the ground. While she continued talking, I remained quiet. I observed. I observed her posture. I observed how even the waitress approached slowly, carefully, like someone entering a battlefield. I observed the couple at the next table whispering, probably commenting on her rudeness. I observed the embarrassed glances, the tense expressions, the forced smiles. Everyone was watching. Everyone. And I didn't need to lift a finger. At one point, my daughter-in-law grew irritated by my silence. She expected a reaction. She expected a confrontation. She expected me to explode. Mom, why aren't you saying anything? She asked, in that defiant tone. Cat got your tongue? My son immediately closed his eyes, as if begging the heavens for me to ignore him. And I ignored him. I just took a deep breath, calmly, and drank a sip of my water. Her expression changed. She didn't know what to do with that. Silence began to surround her like a wall. She spoke, but her words no longer found ground to reach. They didn't find my anger. They didn't find my tears. They didn't find my fragility. It was as if she were throwing stones into the wind. And the truth is that empty people hate when the world stops reacting to them. It's as if they lose their power, as if something inside them crumbles. And that's what happened. She started to get restless. She tapped her fingertips on the table. She rolled her eyes. She tried to provoke me. She tried to poke me. She tried to squeeze any crumb of emotion out of me. But I remained there firm. And the firmer I became, the more insecure she grew. Because the truth is simple. Those who need to humiliate others have no control over themselves. Those who need to prove something have nothing. The waitress noticed the change. As she brought more water, she placed her hand on my shoulder and asked softly, "Are you okay, ma'am?" And I, in the softest voice I could muster, replied, "I'm fine, dear. I've seen worse." It was a reminder to myself, and perhaps a silent warning to the universe. I had already weathered real storms. That dinner was just an unpleasant drizzle that would soon pass. And there, in that instant, I felt almost as if time had stopped. Because deep down I knew the silence I had chosen wasn't erasing anything. It was only pushing everything to the right moment, to the exact time when the truth would come, to the instant when it would be confronted not by my voice, but by the consequences of its own actions. I remained silent because I understood something very important that night. It's not always the one who shouts who wins. Sometimes silence is the answer. He's the one who controls everything. From the very beginning, I knew my daughter-in-law had a plan. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't impulsiveness. It was intentional. She didn't just want to provoke me. She wanted to decrease. She wanted me to shrink in front of everyone, to seem fragile, outdated, incapable. People like her don't play fair. They prepare the stage in advance. And that night, every word she spoke, every gesture, every fake smile was part of a spectacle she herself had planned. She always had this need to prove something, to prove she was superior, to prove she knew more, to prove she deserved more respect than anyone else in the room. And of course, for someone to seem great, someone needs to seem small. I was chosen for that role. Maybe because I didn't show off. Maybe because I wasn't afraid of her. Or maybe, and this is the painful truth, because she knew my son loved me, and that bothered her deeply. While I remained silent, she moved on to the second phase of her plan, constructing a narrative. Every sentence she uttered was calculated to reinforce the image she wanted the world to see. The poor, naive, out-of-place mother-in-law, unprepared for places like that. At one point, still holding the menu, she sighed loudly and said, "Oh, honey, I feel bad. Your mom must be overwhelmed. She's not used to classy places." She said this looking at me, but speaking to him, as if I were invisible. She wanted to turn me into a caricature, a living joke, a funny story to tell her friends. And when I realized that, something inside me tightened, a mixture of sadness and clarity, because I knew that this type of woman doesn't attack out of force, she attacks out of insecurity. The brilliance of others always bothered her. Even the discreet brilliance of an older woman, sitting in silence, holding her dignity between her fingers. Her plan intensified when she started including others in the conversation. She made loud comments, wanting the tables next to her to hear. She tilted her chin up, exaggerated her facial expressions, all to ensure the audience was paying attention. "I mean, it's not her fault," she said, touching my son's shoulder. "She wasn't raised in places like this. She doesn't know the etiquette." When she said that, I heard someone behind me sigh, annoyed. It wasn't just me, it was her. And she loved it. She loved thinking she was impressing people, that they looked at her with admiration. But it was exactly the opposite. The looks she received were looks of bewilderment, of second-hand embarrassment, of pure discomfort. She didn't realize it because she was too caught up in her own reflection. Narcissists have this flaw. They see the world as a mirror, never as a real stage where there are consequences. The waitress noticed again. When she came to bring the water, she observed me with that tender look and then looked at my daughter-in-law with unexpected firmness. As if to say silently, "I know what you're doing." It was one of those moments when I realized I wasn't alone. Even though no one intervened, there were witnesses. There were people seeing the truth. And that was enough. Because the universe is just. It always finds a way to balance things out. The strangest thing is that her plan was so obvious that even my son noticed. At one point, he leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and stared at her with a hard look, unusual for him. "Enough," he said, low but firm. "Just stop." She laughed, disconcerted, but didn't give up. People like that don't back down easily. The need to humiliate is like an addiction. It needs to be constantly fed, even if it hurts everyone around them. She thought she was in control. She thought she had the whole situation in her hands. She thought I was too fragile to fight back. And in a way, I let her believe it. Because, oh, my son, there is no more powerful blow than allowing someone to destroy themselves with their own words. I just needed to wait. Wait for the moment. Wait for the perfect time. And believe me, it was coming. Because every cruel plan has a flaw, and my daughter-in-law's, it was about to collapse in front of everyone. There are moments in life that arrive quietly, without warning, but change everything. While my daughter-in-law continued her performance, my son, exhausted and embarrassed, picked up his cell phone to breathe a little, away from the situation. He held the device with both hands, as if it were the only emotional anchor he had left. I watched him without saying anything. Something in his face changed little by little, like a dark cloud forming on the horizon. At first, I thought he was just looking at work messages or trying to distract himself. But then, and I'll never forget this image, his finger stopped in the middle of the screen. It stopped completely. His face hardened, then paled, then began to turn red, not from shame this time, but from something deeper. Anger. Disbelief.
Pain.
I saw his chest rise and fall, quickly, as if he'd been punched in the face. He blinked several times, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He brought the phone closer to his face, then moved it away. He ran a hand through his hair, nervously. My daughter-in-law didn't notice anything. She was too busy laughing at a joke she herself had made about wine prices. I continued looking at my son, as only a mother knows how, with the kind of concern that senses what's happening even before knowing what it is. "Son," I whispered softly, so she wouldn't hear. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the screen, eyes wide, jaw clenched. That moment, my heart froze. He turned his phone slowly, like someone carrying a bomb about to explode. I only managed to see a reflection of the screen, but it was enough. Photos, messages, conversations, and the worst part, recent notifications. They weren't old memories, they were new, fresh things sent that very day. His expression said it all. Betrayed.
Deceived.
Ridicule. And my daughter-in-law always had a venomous streak, but now I could see it clearly. There was much more hidden. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, but the pain was there, etched on his face. He looked up at me as if seeking support, and I offered it. I touched his hand discreetly under the table. He gripped it tightly, a desperate force, like someone needing a hug but only able to ask with their fingertips. I felt his trembling. I felt the fear. I felt the anger. When he finally managed to look at her, there was no longer any gentleness in his gaze. There was only disbelief. He cleared his throat and called her name, low, but firm. It took her a while to notice. She kept talking, laughing, and recounting how, in fancy houses like those, she felt in her natural habitat. When she finally looked at him, still smiling, he didn't smile back. The silence between them was so heavy, so dense, that even the waiter stopped walking for a second. "What is this?" he asked, showing his cell phone. She froze. The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Her eyes, once so full of arrogance, widened in shock. She swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "Honey, where did you see that?" But her voice trembled. Yes, it trembled. And in that trembling, I saw fear. Real fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being exposed. My son didn't answer. He simply placed his cell phone in the center of the table, as if it were irrefutable proof. She reached out to take the device, but he pulled it back immediately, firmly, without hesitation. And there was her fatal mistake, thinking that no one would find out, that her lies would be eternal, that her manipulation would never emerge from the shadows. But life always has a way of revealing everything at the right time. And the universe seems to have chosen that restaurant, that table, that dinner, that exact moment, to reveal what my son never imagined would happen. I didn't know exactly what the messages contained. I didn't need to. The pain in my son's eyes said everything I needed to know. And in that instant, while my daughter-in-law desperately tried to invent an excuse, I realized something very important. The humiliation she tried to inflict on me. Now he was going back to her, and this time, she wouldn't be able to escape. When the atmosphere was heavier than ever, with my son still clutching his cell phone as if it were an open wound, the waiter approached with the bill envelope. He was so cautious he seemed to be carrying dynamite. The entire atmosphere had shifted. Even those unaware of what was happening could sense in the air that something had broken at that table. And my daughter-in-law, she did the unthinkable. As soon as she saw the waiter approaching, she smiled again. A cynical smile. Small enough to say, "Now it's my turn to shine again." She thought she could solve everything by resuming her usual little show. As if she could erase the tension she had created. As if it were possible to sweep the truth under the rug by blinking and striking a pose. When the waiter placed the envelope in the center of the table, she leaned back in her chair and let out a mocking sigh, as if she were eager to save me. "Oh, finally," she said, crossing her legs with exaggerated elegance, and then he looked at me. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll handle it." I felt the air disappear for a moment, not because of what she said. I was already used to the poison, but because of the audacity. Even after everything my son had just seen on the phone, even realizing he was devastated, even knowing something very serious was happening there, she still found the strength to try and humiliate me once again. Some people only know how to exist when there's someone to walk all over them. My son looked at her angrily for the first time that night. Genuine anger, that which comes from seeing someone cross the line. "Stop it," he murmured, holding the envelope before she could touch it, but she laughed. He laughed as if he were dealing with a child's tantrum.
Honey, relax.
"Your mom's trying her best, but this is too much for her." The waiter, the poor waiter, swallowed hard and glanced at me quickly, as if apologizing for being there witnessing all this. I felt every muscle in my body stiffen, as if I were being pushed to a dangerous edge. But again, I took a deep breath. Silence was still my weapon. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to argue back. Everything was about to reveal itself. My son slowly opened the envelope. His hand trembled, but not from fear. It trembled from accumulated frustration. I saw in his eyes the internal battle between confronting her right then and there or holding back for a few more minutes. My daughter-in-law leaned forward as if curious about the amount, but in reality, she was just waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike again. And he attacked. "See," she said, tapping her painted nail on the table. "It's expensive. Way too expensive for her." He pointed discreetly at me, as if I were a dead weight in the family. If I were there as a favor. That phrase, that sentence pierced the air like an arrow. But before I could open my mouth, before any words could come out, my son interrupted her. He looked up, his gaze steady, determined, and for the first time that night his voice came out clear, loud, strong enough to silence the table next to him. "You don't have to worry about who can pay for this, because you won't be paying anything today." Her eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't stop. He held the envelope with both hands, took a deep breath, and said words I will never forget. Because this entire dinner, everything was prepaid. And at that moment, I saw her mask tremble. She didn't understand yet, but she was about to, and it would be painful. When my son revealed that dinner had been prepaid, my daughter-in-law froze in place. It was like watching someone stumble into their own trap. For the first time that night, she didn't have a ready answer, nor a sarcastic comment on the tip of her tongue. She blinked slowly, trying to understand, trying to regain control, and failing miserably. Her silence was almost as satisfying as any response I could have given. And before she could compose herself, something unexpected happened. The manager showed up. A tall man, wearing an impeccable suit, walked towards us with firm, decisive steps. He held a small briefcase in his hands, and, as he approached the table, I noticed a different glint in his eye. It wasn't the look of someone coming to collect a debt. It was the look of someone coming to confirm something. And my daughter-in-law, seeing him, quickly adjusted her hair, thinking he was coming, for Hushi always thought everything revolved around her. "Good evening," he said, leaning slightly towards me. Not for her form. Her face lost its color. He placed the briefcase on the table with utmost care, as if he were handing over something precious. The waitress, who was nearby, discreetly crossed her arms and watched. Something told me she knew what was about to happen. My son straightened his posture, but my daughter-in-law, she began to get restless. Her hands trembled. Her leg tapped nervously on the floor. "Ma'am, Gerenti Salhando Directament Paramim, I just wanted to personally thank you once again for choosing our restaurant and for arranging everything with such care." My daughter-in-law's eyes widened. He continued, "Your reservation was marked as special. You paid for the full course in advance, including the dessert presentation and the private table setup." You'd have to see my daughter-in-law's expression to believe it. Her mouth was slightly open, eyebrows raised. His face burned with shame. It was as if, in that instant, everything she had said, absolutely everything, had turned against her. "Is there anything else you need tonight, Mrs. __________"? He said my last name with respect, with elegance, with gratitude, and I, with my heart racing, simply replied, "No, thank you. Everything is perfect. Perfect." The word echoed across the table as if it had been chosen by destiny itself. My daughter-in-law tried to laugh, tried to disguise it, tried to compose herself. "Oh, I didn't know she did all that." Her voice faltered. Her mask was cracking like thin glass under too much weight. For the first time, she seemed small, truly small, not because I had diminished her, but because the truth had finally illuminated what she had been trying to hide. The waitress approached slowly, stopped beside the manager, and, with a discreet smile, added, "She planned everything weeks ago. She came personally to check the lighting, the menu, even the table placement. It was all made with a lot of love." That word, love, it fell onto the table like a final verdict. My son looked at me with tears in his eyes. My daughter-in-law looked at the plate as if she wanted to disappear. And me, I just took a deep breath, because at that moment, without raising their voices, without retaliating, without attacking, the truth had done the work for me. And that was just the beginning. Her downfall was not yet over. After the manager left, my daughter-in-law became so quiet she seemed to have lost her own voice. It was as if, for the first time, she had truly realized that her words had weight, and that weight now fell directly upon her. Her silence was so strange, so out of the ordinary, that even the restaurant seemed to notice. The waitress passed by and cast a quick, almost satisfied glance, as if witnessing justice unfold before her eyes. But the universe was not yet finished. There was still a truth she didn't know, a truth that burned to get out. My son, his face still marked by the pain of the messages he had seen on his cell phone, finally leaned back in his chair. He took a deep breath, as if gathering strength he didn't know if he still possessed. His hand trembled. His eyes were red. And when he looked at me, I understood this was the moment he had postponed for months, perhaps years. The truth he had kept swallowed, suffocated, hidden behind fake smiles and tense dinners. "Mom," he began, his voice breaking, but before I could continue, my daughter-in-law interrupted. "Honey, we should just..." He raised his hand, and for the first time, she obeyed. He fell silent. "I need to tell her," my son said. He was looking at me, but the blade of those words was meant for her, and I felt it. She felt it too. He placed his cell phone on the table, turned the screen face down, as if symbolically burying what he had just discovered. And then, with a sincerity so profound it broke my heart, he said, "Mom, I've been paying for everything in our house alone." My world stopped. I wasn't expecting that, but she turned pale as if she had been punched in the stomach. He continued, each word heavier than the last. "She doesn't pay anything. Not the rent. Not the bills. Not groceries. Nothing." With each sentence, my daughter-in-law grew smaller, minor, and smaller. I stared at her slowly. She immediately looked away. Embarrassed, it wasn't the noble kind of shame, the kind that comes from conscience. It was the desperate shame of someone who had been exposed. My son took a deep breath before finishing. "And she's been telling everyone that she supports us, that I depend on her, that you're a burden." He said this while looking directly into her eyes, and for the first time, she couldn't hide it. The mask has completely fallen off. I felt a chill run up my spine, and it was no surprise. Part of me always knew, but to hear it from my own son, to hear the choked back pain, to hear the truth he carried alone, it was like feeling the weight of all the years I tried to protect him and failed. My daughter-in-law tried to say something, but her voice came out weak, broken. "Honey, that's not how it is." But he shook his head. "Stop. Just stop." It was a sentence, free, final, necessary. I stood motionless, feeling my heart beat heavily, slowly, deeply. That was the truth she never expected to hear, the truth that shattered the narrative she had created for so long. The truth finally revealed who really carried that household, who supported that family, who endured everything in silence. And there, in front of everyone, she realized, it wasn't me who was small. She was the one who never amounted to much. But the revelation of that night, the greatest of all, there was still more to come. There was such a dense silence around the table that it seemed possible to touch it with one's hands. My daughter-in-law remained motionless, staring at her plate as if she could disappear into it. My son, on the other hand, seemed to have awakened from a long and painful trance. It was as if he had finally seen his own life clearly, as if he had opened his eyes after years of living in fog. And this clarity hurt, but it was liberating. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the table, and straightened his posture, something he hadn't done in a long time. That simple gesture said it all. He was no longer the man cowering in shame, guilt, or fear.
He was the son I raised.
The strong, just, honest man who had always existed within him, but who had been suffocated by emotional manipulation. And when he finally faced his wife, I saw the beginning of panic in her eyes. "I'm done," he said, 2 words, but they fell onto the table like an earthquake. My daughter-in-law tried to laugh, as she always did, to try and defuse a conflict. "Oh, honey, you're overreacting. Let's just," he raised his palm, not aggressively, but with absolute firmness, and that silenced her immediately. It was the first time she truly understood that he wasn't joking. He turned to me for a moment, and when our eyes met, I felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride at seeing him finally stand up for himself. Sadness at realizing how much he had carried alone. He squeezed my hand under the table, like when he was a boy and afraid of something. But now, he wasn't asking for protection. He was making sure I was there to see him reclaim his own dignity. "You humiliated her," he said to his wife, pointing at me with his chin. His voice no longer trembled. "In front of strangers. Repeatedly. For months." She interrupted him. "I never." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and continued. "You lied. About money. About support. About us." Each word was a stone placed upon the grave of their relationship. Her expression changed rapidly, from arrogance to fear, from fear to despair. She tried to touch his arm, but he recoiled. Not violently, but with something even more painful. Indifference. Her mask, which had already cracked before, was now shattering into pieces. And, for the first time that night, she seemed truly vulnerable, perhaps even human. But it was too late. His eyes were fixed on her, but his mind seemed distant, revisiting every comment, every humiliation, every lie she had told over the years. And when he spoke again, his voice was laden with a pain I had never heard from him before. "You made me ashamed of the person who raised me. The only person who has ever been on my side." I almost cried at that moment, not because of his words, but because of the weight they carried. She tried to argue, tried to invent explanations, tried to manipulate the narrative as she had done so many times before. But nothing worked. He had crossed the point of no return. "I saw the messages," he said. Her throat went dry. Her eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. "You betrayed me." It was there, in that sentence, in that heavy breathing, in that restrained tremor, that everything changed. He wasn't just reacting to what she did to me, he was reacting to what she did to him, to what she destroyed inside their home, to the lies that made him question even his own mother. I saw my son reborn at that table. I saw a broken man rise again from the remnants of the deception he lived in. The waitress, standing a few meters away, watched everything in silence. She knew, everyone knew, that this was the moment that closed a cycle, a story, an emotional prison. My daughter-in-law rubbed her face, trying to hold back tears, but nothing could protect her from the truth that had finally caught up with her. And there, in front of everyone, my son did something I never expected to see that night. He broke free. But the public reaction was yet to come, and it would be devastating. When my son finished speaking, the entire restaurant seemed to stop. Conversations subsided, cutlery ceased to clink, even the lights seemed brighter than they should have been. It was as if everyone there had felt the impact of those words. "You betrayed me." My daughter-in-law remained motionless for a few seconds, like a cracked statue about to collapse. Her hands trembled in her lap, and her eyes, once so full of arrogance, were now wide, gleaming with pure despair. She tried to take a deep breath, but no air came. And then, she finally looked around and realized the truth. Nobody was on her side, and no one showed sympathy, and no face showed support. The eyes that had previously perceived her comments as impertinence now observed her as if she were the very embodiment of shame. The woman at the next table, the one who had earlier looked at her disapprovingly, now shook her head slowly, as if to say, it was only a matter of time. The elderly couple looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. The group of young people who had previously been laughing loudly were now silent, paying full attention, like spectators watching the climax of an inevitable drama. My daughter-in-law felt it. Trust me, I saw the exact fraction of a second in which she realized she was exposed, nude, and masked, and charm, out of control. And her reaction, "Oh, my son," it was painfully predictable. She tried to deny it. "Honey, please, it's not what you think." But her voice came out too shaky, too weak, too unconvincing, even for herself. She tried to get up from the chair, as if she could escape that reality, but her body wouldn't obey. She staggered slightly to the side, and the waiter, always kind, took a step forward to help her, but she recoiled abruptly, ashamed. The entire restaurant witnessed it. The entire restaurant saw it. There was no way to hide it anymore. The waitress approached slowly, not to humiliate her, but to make sure she was all right. It was instinct, pure kindness. But my daughter-in-law interpreted it as yet another blow. "I'm fine," she said in a broken voice, hurriedly wiping away her tears, but his fingers were trembling. The makeup was running, and pride, that had already slipped away before the first tear even fell. My son stood motionless, observing everything with an expression of profound pain. It wasn't pleasure in seeing her suffer. My son isn't like that. It was sadness. Sadness for the life he had built with someone who didn't respect him. Sadness for the lie he had lived. Sadness for realizing that love may not be enough when character is lacking. He took a deep breath, as if he were burying there, in front of everyone, the last hope he still held. And then it happened. The waitress placed her hand on my daughter-in-law's shoulder and said in a low voice, "Ma'am, maybe you should sit down." My daughter-in-law tried to say something, but her voice failed her, and at that moment, she finally gave in. He sat down, head down, hidden face. The entire audience was watching. I still remember the sound of conversations gradually resuming, whispers, whispers, sideways glances. Every gesture she made that night became a public trial. Every unkind word came back to hit her like a boomerang. Every humiliation she tried to inflict on me now burned within her. And the worst part, the final part was still missing, the part she would never have imagined, the part that would truly change everything. After all that exposure, the restaurant seemed to breathe with a strange kind of calm, as if even the walls were waiting to see what would happen next. My daughter-in-law remained seated, head bowed, hands trembling, trying to recover even a fragment of the dignity that was slipping through her fingers. And I, in silence, observed, not with cruelty, not with pleasure, but with that serenity that only comes when the truth is finally revealed. My son looked at her for a long time, and in that look was everything: hurt, exhaustion, wounded love, contained anger, disappointment accumulated over years. He seemed to be seeing his wife for the first time, not through the lens of hope, but of reality. And that reality hurt. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the table, and said, in a tone that silenced the entire restaurant again, "This ends today." And nobody needed to ask what that meant. She slowly raised her face, her eyes brimming with tears, her makeup smudged, her expression completely disarmed. It was as if, suddenly, that entire image of superiority had been ripped away at once. She tried to grab his arm, but he recoiled firmly. There was no more hesitation in his gesture. He was no longer confused. He was no longer torn. He was resolute. And that decision was the final blow to the fragile armor she wore. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry," she said, her voice trembling, almost childlike, but my son didn't answer. He simply stared at her, silent, letting the weight of the situation speak for him, and she understood. In the most painful way possible. He realized he had gone too far. That's when he put his cell phone back on the table, this time face up. The lit screen showed recent messages, words I could only read in a glance, but which tightened my chest. Betrayal.
Lies.
Manipulation. Hidden conversations. He didn't need to explain anything. The truth was there, clear, bright, impossible to ignore. My daughter-in-law covered her face with her hands, as if she wanted to hide from the whole world. The waitress, who had watched the whole scene with eyes full of empathy, carefully approached and placed a small dessert box on the table. "This is complimentary," she said softly, and then he looked directly at me. "For her. She deserves something sweet today." A simple gesture, but it was like a silent embrace. My daughter-in-law looked at the box, but didn't touch it. She knew that small dessert box was more symbolic than any speech I could have given. It was proof that even the restaurant staff, complete strangers, had seen through her true self. And not because I said anything, but because she herself showed it. The waitress smiled at me respectfully, and I felt my eyes welling up for the first time that night. My son stood up slowly. I followed along. She also tried to get up, but froze for a second, as if she no longer knew what to do. "Please don't leave like this," she pleaded. But my son only replied, "Think about everything you did. That's your lesson." And that was all. One sentence. Simple, but it weighed like a sentence. As we left the restaurant, I felt a cold light from outside touch my face. I took a deep breath, feeling the night air enter my lungs like a new beginning. My son placed his hand on my back and said, in a whisper I will cherish forever, "I'm so sorry, Mom." And I replied, with a firm voice full of love, "You learned today, Meufilio." And she learned too. Because in that restaurant, at that brightly lit table, on that night that began with humiliation and ended with truth, my daughter-in-law received the lesson she was trying to push onto me. Life always takes its toll, and when it charges, the snake is in front of everyone. A lesson. When I got home that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands. Old hands full of stories, full of silent battles that no one saw. And there, alone, I realized a truth that perhaps I had forgotten. No one can diminish you when you know exactly who you are. Her humiliation was never about me. It was always about her emptiness. My son learned, I learned, and she received the hardest lesson life has to offer. The truth always comes out sooner or later, and when it does, it doesn't ask permission. And now I ask you, my son, my daughter, who is listening to me on the other side of the screen, how many times has someone tried to belittle you just to feel bigger? How many times have you swallowed your tears to keep the peace? How many masks have you seen fall right before your eyes, just like what happened to me? And most importantly, will you continue to remain silent, or will you choose your dignity? That's life. One day you are humiliated, on the other hand, he witnesses justice unfolding before his very eyes. And if my story touched you, made you think, reminded you of something you've already experienced, so don't leave without doing your part. Like the video, share your opinion in the comments. I read everything. And subscribe to the channel, turning on notifications. Because here we tell true stories, stories that hurt, stories that heal, stories that transform. And you won't want to miss the next one. That she will never, ever forget.